Video 88, Consultation Skills, Area 9, MCHES Sub-Competencies 2.4.1, 7.3.1, 7.3.2. Review the learning objectives for this video. Welcome to this advanced module on consultation skills, and I am really glad we are covering this because consultation is one of those distinctive MCHES competencies that sets you apart as a professional. Consultation goes beyond the direct service delivery role typical of entry-level health educators. As a consultant, you bring specialized expertise to organizations that need help with assessment, planning, implementation, evaluation, or capacity building, but you do so in an advisory role rather than as a direct program manager. The first critical distinction I want to make sure you understand for the MCHES exam is the difference between internal and external consultants. An internal consultant is an employee of the organization that is seeking the consultation. For example, you might be a health education specialist employed by a large hospital system, and your internal medicine department asks you to consult on redesigning their patient education materials. You are consulting, but you are also an insider. Internal consultants have several advantages. They already understand the organizational culture, the power dynamics, the unwritten rules, the history of previous initiatives, and the personalities involved. They have existing relationships with staff and leadership, which can facilitate access to information and cooperation. They also cost less because they are already on the payroll. However, internal consultants face significant challenges. Because they depend on the organization for their livelihood, they may face explicit or implicit pressure to align their recommendations with what leadership wants to hear. Their objectivity can be compromised by loyalty, relationships, or career considerations. Staff may also view internal consultants as extensions of management rather than as independent advisors, which can reduce candor in interviews and focus groups. An external consultant is hired from outside the organization specifically for the consultation engagement. External consultants bring a fresh perspective unencumbered by institutional history, politics, or blind spots. They are often perceived as more objective and credible precisely because they do not have ongoing relationships or employment dependencies within the organization. Their outsider status can make it easier for staff to share honest feedback. The disadvantages of external consultants are the mirror image of the internal consultants' advantages. External consultants lack deep knowledge of the organization's culture, history, and internal dynamics. They must invest significant time in orientation and relationship building before they can be effective. They are also more expensive because they charge professional consulting fees and may have travel and overhead costs. On the MCHES exam, you will encounter scenarios that ask you to identify which type of consultant is most appropriate for a given situation. Here is the decision rule to keep in mind. When the consultation requires deep insider knowledge and the objectivity concern is manageable, an internal consultant may be preferred. When the situation demands maximum objectivity, fresh perspective, or independence from organizational politics, an external consultant is the better choice. Situations involving program evaluation, personnel issues, or politically sensitive recommendations almost always call for an external consultant. You are going to find this distinction very helpful on the exam. Now let us talk about something that is incredibly practical and also very testable, and that is the consultation contract. The consultation contract is a legal document that governs the professional relationship between the consultant and the client organization. For the MCHES exam, you must understand the essential components of a well-constructed consultation contract because questions frequently test whether you can identify what is missing from a flawed contract or what should be included to prevent common problems. Let me walk you through each component. The scope of work is arguably the most important section of any consultation contract. The scope precisely defines what the consultant will do and, equally important, what the consultant will not do. A well-written scope of work prevents scope creep, which is the gradual expansion of the project beyond its original boundaries. Scope creep is one of the most common problems in health education consulting. For example, a consultant hired to evaluate a tobacco cessation program might be asked mid-project to also redesign the program's intake procedures, develop new marketing materials, and train new staff. If the scope of work does not clearly limit the engagement, the consultant faces pressure to absorb additional work without additional compensation or timeline adjustments. The deliverables section specifies the tangible products the consultant will produce. These might include a written assessment report, a presentation to the board of directors, a set of recommendations with implementation timelines, training curricula, evaluation instruments, or data analysis summaries. Each deliverable should be described in enough detail that both parties agree on what constitutes satisfactory completion. The timeline section establishes the project schedule, including major milestones, interim check-in dates with the client, and the final completion date. Health education consultations often involve phases, such as a data collection phase, an analysis phase, and a reporting phase, and the timeline should reflect this structure. The compensation section specifies how the consultant will be paid. Common fee structures include hourly rates, fixed project fees, and retainer arrangements. The payment schedule, whether payment occurs upon completion, at milestones, or on a monthly basis, should also be specified. The confidentiality section is critically important in health education consulting because consultants often have access to sensitive organizational data, employee health information, community health data, and information shared in confidence during interviews and focus groups. The contract must specify how this information will be protected, who has access to it, and how it will be handled after the engagement concludes. Finally, the intellectual property section addresses ownership of the work products created during the consultation. Does the client organization own the final report, the data sets, and the training materials? Or does the consultant retain ownership and grant the client a license to use them? This section prevents disputes that can damage professional relationships and create legal liability. On the MCHES exam, when you encounter a scenario describing a consultation engagement that has gone wrong, examine the contract elements first. Problems almost always trace back to a missing or poorly defined scope of work, unclear deliverables, or inadequate confidentiality provisions. Keep these 6 components in mind and you will be well prepared. Now I want to walk you through one of the most nuanced aspects of MCHES level consultation, and that is recognizing where the consultant role intersects with other areas of responsibility. This is the kind of professional judgment question that the advanced exam loves to test, so let me help you think through it clearly. The overlap with Area 2, which covers planning, occurs because consultation engagements frequently involve helping organizations design, redesign, or evaluate their health education programs. A consultant might be hired to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment and then develop strategic recommendations for program development. This work draws directly on the planning competencies outlined in Area 2, including identifying priority populations, selecting evidence-based strategies, developing goals and objectives, and creating implementation timelines. Here is the key distinction to remember. As a consultant, you advise on planning. You do not own the plan. The client organization retains decision-making authority over which recommendations to adopt, how to modify them, and whether to implement them at all. A consultant who crosses this boundary and begins making implementation decisions unilaterally has exceeded the advisory role. The overlap with Area 7, which covers communication and advocacy, occurs when consultants are asked to represent the client organization in public forums, communicate findings to external stakeholders, or advocate for policy changes based on their assessment findings. A consultant presenting recommendations to a city council, speaking to the media about program evaluation results, or drafting public health communications on behalf of the client is operating within Area 7 competencies. The ethical boundary here is transparency. When a consultant speaks publicly on behalf of a client, the audience should understand the consultant's role and relationship to the organization. Now let me share some of the most common ethical dilemmas you should be prepared for. One involves dual relationships. A dual relationship occurs when the consultant has more than one role in relation to the client. For example, a health education consultant who also serves on the client organization's board of directors faces a dual relationship. Their objectivity as a consultant may be compromised by their governance responsibilities, and their board decisions may be influenced by their financial interest as a paid consultant. Professional ethics require that dual relationships be disclosed, carefully managed, and avoided when the conflict of interest is too significant to manage. Another common ethical issue is scope creep from consultation into direct service delivery. A consultant hired to evaluate a program and recommend improvements might gradually shift into managing the program itself, especially if the organization lacks internal capacity. While this transition might seem helpful, it fundamentally changes the professional relationship and creates dependence on the consultant rather than building the organization's own capacity. The MCHES exam tests your ability to recognize these boundary issues and apply the appropriate professional standard. The correct approach is almost always to maintain clear role boundaries, disclose potential conflicts, and defer implementation decisions to the client organization. You have really rounded out your understanding of consultation skills here. In the next module, we will review all of the advanced topics together. Read the scenario stem aloud. Give students 30 seconds to consider options before advancing. The correct answer is C. The correct answer is C. Professional ethics require that evaluation findings be reported accurately and completely. Omitting negative findings compromises the integrity of the evaluation and violates professional standards for honest reporting. However, the consultant can exercise professional judgment in how findings are presented. Offering to frame negative findings constructively with actionable recommendations demonstrates both ethical integrity and practical consultation skill. Option A creates a deceptive document by hiding findings from stakeholders who have a right to see them. Option B incorrectly defines the consultant's obligation as serving whatever the client requests rather than maintaining professional standards. Option D is an overreaction because the appropriate first step is to address the ethical concern directly with the client rather than immediately withdrawing. Summarize the key takeaways